lived in the US for 40 years, but well connected with India. I've visited India every single year, 3 or 4 times on the average, not missed a single year. So I'm extremely familiar, confident, and connected with what goes on in India. And I've basically been looking at the West from an Indian eyes, Indian pair of eyes, and understanding what's different about the West as we would see it. The topic today, and I've written a book on being different, which is what is distinct about our civilization, because unless you know what is distinct, you cannot have an identity. You can, if there's nothing different, then what's the identity for? What exactly are you defending? Who are you when you're defending it? You need to know who you are. So the methodology I've used is contrast. Contrast as to what is distinct compared to others. And this gives us a very solid collection of items that are very distinct about us, so we can create an identity. A lot of India books define India as, modern secular democracy. But there's nothing distinct about that. You could say that about France, you could say that about Spain, you could say that about a lot of people. So there has to be a sense of going earlier in time. If you meet business people from China, they have a very big sense of history as to who they are from Confucian times onwards. If you meet Japanese people, they have a very distinct sense of identity. If you meet French, if you meet Russians, if you meet English people, when you meet Americans, they have a grand sense of founding fathers and their extraordinary, what is called American exceptionalism, which means why America is an exceptional place. And these comprise what is called a grand narrative, the grand narrative of the nation. And there is a consensus on it. There are dissident groups on the margins, but the consensus is very strong in each of these examples I gave you, and it's not going away in the near future. And this is what's taught from childhood. This is what's reflected in the policy making. India lacks a pan-Indian grand narrative, which would be a consensus in the mainstream. There's a lot of little fragmented groups with their own separatist or separate identities. And the idea of nation built on modern secular democracy, I believe, is not strong enough and does not give credit to a lot of our classical civilizational qualities, which are very distinct and very powerful. And my latest book, Being Different, is entirely on showing you what those qualities are. As far as the world order is concerned, I see that to understand the world order, the first thing you should understand is that things are going to get pretty bad. The intensity between demand and supply is going to worsen because of scarcity of resources and huge population. People used to say the population will level at 7 billion, now it's already 7, then they said 9, then they said 12, then we heard 15, and recently 2 weeks ago I heard some demographers around the world saying that it will reach 20 billion. As long as medical science keeps making improvements to lifespan, people living longer and longer, the longevity is not going, the population is hardly going to stabilize. So this is a huge number of people in the planet that we added. No addition to the water supply, no addition to the oil, to various kinds of raw material. And not only the number of people expanding, but their expectations. Their expectations in terms of, the world is being run on this Western idea of consumerism. So consuming more and more every year, otherwise Sensex will drop and Dow Jones will drop, because to have earnings growth, you need to convince people to keep consuming more, and that's how your earnings will drop. So a combination of growing consumer consumption and increasing population puts a huge stress on raw material, natural resources, capital. So I feel that the intensity, the tensions are going to continue. And statistically it's also proven, because recently some statistics in the US showed that the top few, the ratio between the richest few percent and the poorest few percent has become far worse than 10 years ago. So these fault lines are in fact getting worse. So when you have such intense competition, these civilizational identities become like collective bargaining. It's like, when there's serious competition, people hang together. So you should not expect that nation states are going to go away, that, these identities are all obsolete. I hear that from people who say, well, why are you talking about identities and nation as if it's something wrong? And I quickly point out that, whatever your message you're preaching, that we should give up identities and sense of nation, go and tell the French, go and tell the British, go and tell the Russians, tell the Chinese, tell the Japanese, Americans, Arabs, and see if you can get anywhere. But in India, it's become very fashionable to deconstruct the nation as if it's a problem, and to be very suspicious of anybody talking about identity. Now, the issue, it is true that identities have caused problems. Identities have been violence prone. But those are identities which are aggressive identities. They are identities based on a sense of exclusivism and superiority. But this book that I just came out with shows that we have an identity which does not suffer from these problems. So you cannot generalize the issues that identities have and assume that every identity will have those issues, because we do not have some of those issues. So we can have an identity, and we need to have an identity, because of the very nature of the world and the nature of the competitiveness, which is getting fiercer and more intense. Now, in my earlier book, which came out in February, I've done two big books, 600 page, 500 page, two books. The earlier book was called Breaking India, and that was talking about how India is being fragmented under various pressures, with a lot of foreign intervention encouraging that. 2 days ago, we launched a Tamil edition in Coimbatore, and we hope to do other editions. It's done very well, 4 or 5 print runs already in 8 months. So the argument in that book is to show that India, while we are all very happy with statistics that show we're doing well, and there's a middle class and there's billionaires and all those things, but at the lower strata, there is greater and greater fragmentation of identity, more tension, not only Northeast, not only Kashmir, but also the Maoists, also the southern belt with this Dalithistan movement, Dravidstan movement, all these kind of things. And there are foreign nexuses that want to get involved in making matters worse. The foreign nexuses are both the Islamic nexus, messing around from overseas, China nexus, messing around, and the Western nexus to evangelism and human rights. So, on the one hand, I'm arguing that we need a cohesive identity given the nature of the world. On the other hand, I'm showing that there are problems in creating this identity because of history. Over the past 200 years, a whole lot of fragmentation has happened, and we do not have enough counter voices. What's holding together is we all have mobiles and we all, becoming modernized and things like that. But there needs to be something deeper. There needs to be a deeper civilizational sense that we need to bring. Now, being different is my technique to create such an identity. What makes us different from others can be the foundation of who we are, because that is something we are distinctive, which is not something that everybody has. And I use in this book a very classical Indian technique called Purva Paksha, which means you study the other. So the Vedantins would do Purva Paksha with Buddhists, and one Vedanta school with another Vedanta school, and Buddhists would also do Purva Paksha in return, which means I want to understand you very clearly. I'm not in a derogatory way, not in a distorted way, but a very honest way. And it may take me a long time. I'll keep trying until I really get figure out what exactly your position is. And then the Siddhanta is my response, my view on what your position is. This type of inter-worldview, inter-civilizational, dialogical method has been very classical in India, very unique, and India pioneered this kind of argumentation. But unfortunately, we did not do Purva Paksha of the West. Even today, if I go to a prominent Swami who's running an ashram and training other Swamis, typically one of my favorite questions is, when you're training Swamis, what do you do for comparative religion? What do you teach on comparative religion, comparative philosophy? And their answer is nothing. We don't need to, because truth is with us. Why should we worry about others? This kind of let's ignore others, let's stare at our navel, and we don't worry about the world. And then what I have to tell them is Purva Paksha. You did Purva Paksha in the past. He said, yeah, that's how we teach our text. We teach them through the Purva Paksha with Buddhists. So I say, but Buddhists were the dominant other at that time. So it was important to do Purva Paksha to Buddhists. Today, they are not the dominant other. They are not at our doorsteps trying to, get in. Today, it's other civilizations, Islamic, Chinese, Western. So you need to do Purva Paksha of that. And they have no answer because it requires a lot of work, it requires original thinking. The book I just came out with is the result of 15 years of journey and doing Purva Paksha with a lot of opponents from various civilizations to construct a dharmic view of the world's geopolitics and others. And I find it discouraging that a lot of our acharyas are not carrying out a genuine Purva Paksha. Purva Paksha was done recently in the last 200 years. Ram Mohan Roy did it in his way, and I think Sri Aurobindo did it, Gandhi did it when he wrote his pamphlet in Swaraj. So little attempts were done, but much more has happened today that it needs to be updated, and far deeper analysis of the other has to be done to define ourselves. And when we do Purva Paksha of the West, it's not just Christianity. The West also has this whole Enlightenment movement, secular movement, postmodernist movements, Marxist movement. One has to do Purva Paksha for each of them using our own terms. Unfortunately, the West has had so much power in the last few centuries that they have been doing Purva Paksha of us, and we haven't done it to them. So they've been having a whole army of scholars studying India. They studied ideology to study India, and they mapped us in their frame of thinking, in their paradigm, and they translated us into their terminology, their vocabulary, and they controlled therefore the discourse, because after all it is their framework. And then they taught us how to think about ourselves in the European framework, and we bought it. So, for example, our calendar is the Western calendar. We lost track of our own sense of time, and there you can go on and on. So many Indian ways have been lost because we translated and mapped and adopted the colonial worldview. Even to understand ourselves, we do it through Western categories. And when we critique the West, we do it in their own categories, not in our own categories. So this I call Western universalism. And this book is the subtitle is An Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. So I'm taking on this Western universalism point by point and saying here is how an Indian can argue back and say this is our position on different things. The cover of the book is Samudra Manthan, the Devas and Asuras, struggling and tension to churn the ocean. And that is symbolic of my process of manthans with others, which I have done. I have also done internal manthans because the Sri Aurobindo people will not accept ISKCON and the Vedanta people will not accept Buddhists and vice versa. So I've had to do as much manthan internally to come up with what would be a kind of a common dharma position internally and how it can be differentiated and contrasted with the Abrahamic position and the Western secular Enlightenment position externally. And one of the concepts I've come up with is that there are certain ideas and constructs in Sanskrit which are non-translatable. And we should not translate them, because when we translate them, we are basically dissolving ourselves. So when you say, it's fashionable to replace Atman with soul, but if you look at the meaning of soul, there is no reincarnation of a soul, and animals don't have soul, and plants don't have soul. So you actually change the meaning of Atman by replacing it with a word. Or when you take Shakti and say energy, it's really a very distorted view of what it is. So I've taken in one chapter, which is called Sanskrit Non-Translatables, I've taken the various constructs which should be preserved, the Sanskrit word should be preserved, and I've given about 25 examples of doing that. So my sense of India's position in the world order is that India needs to create an identity, India needs to create a consensus, a wide consensus, India needs to teach it in schools, colleges, foreign policy, and India needs to project it just like all the other civilizations do. Just yesterday I addressed the YPO in Chennai, Young Presidents Organization, corporate people, and it was a huge success. It went on in Chennai, it went on for till 11 o'clock, basically explaining, using my own corporate background, because I used to be in their shoes at one time, until 17 years ago when I left the corporate world and started doing this. But explaining that if you understand your civilizational distinction, and if you are able to understand what's different about the other, You can predict their psychology, their behavior when you're negotiating with them. When you're dealing with others, you can do better if you understand this distinction. And others have studied us. There are books written on us through their eyes. And in this latest Being Different, I have a whole chapter on how Americans have studied Indian peculiarity, Indian differences. And I've quoted a Professor Andrew Rotter, who wrote a whole book on American foreign policy makers, what they thought of India secretly in their secret memos, which later became public. And it's very strange kind of things they thought of us. So we need to know how we are perceived by the other, and we need to be able to articulate our own view of the other. And only through this differentiation can we create a sense of civilization. Otherwise, you can have a military, you can have an economy, you can have Bhangra and Bollywood, and you can have cricket and all these good things. But that is not enough to have a strong identity, and if you are disowning your history, and or especially dangerous if you are taking on a distorted history, which is what we've been taught for the last couple of generations. So that's my view, and if you're interested, I welcome you to read that, and then we can discuss further. Thank you.